In the past year or so, I've noticed an increase in content about a growing movement of so-called Tradwives, short for traditional wives or traditional housewives. These are women primarily in the US and in the UK who elect to forego work and sometimes higher education in favor of staying at home to tend to household chores and child rearing while they are taken care of by a man who works outside the home and is the sole breadwinner in the family. Like everything else, the Tradwife movement is all over social media, and the overriding aesthetic is deep 1950s, with some Tradwives adopting 1950s fashion and hairstyles, and even going so far as to use cookbooks and textbooks for their children that were published in the 1950s. Think Stepford Wives, Mad Men, and The Handmaid's Tale. More recently, the Tradwife movement was parodied in the Olivia Wilde film Don't Worry Darling, which you can watch on Netflix. Most, but not all, Tradwives are conservative, Christian, and as you can imagine, white. They're also very young, as in their prefrontal cortex has not finished developing, which means they are still eligible to date Leonardo DiCaprio. Tradwives espouse what they term traditional values, including very rigid heteronormative gender roles, the tried and true go-to historical tool of the oppression of women, that good old-fashioned division of labor, and the one that really got me, the supposedly biblical notion that women are obligated to, quote, submit to their husbands. Oh my Lanta. Send me that Bible verse if you can find that. Let me go ahead and translate that one for you. Submission means having sex with him whenever he wants. Submission means sex on demand. That's what it means. Tradwives hate feminism, which they fault for some sort of mysterious decline in society, all while seemingly oblivious to the truth that they benefit every day from the hard-won rights and freedoms that our feminist ancestors literally died for. And as you can imagine, the Tradwife movement is heavily affiliated with white nationalism and the alt-right, which, let's face it, only tolerates women because they want the votes, and plays into the replacement theory hysteria that white women should fulfill their reproductive duty by having as many children as possible in order to propagate the white race. As you know, American women have lost their reproductive rights, and right-wingers are calling for outlawing not only birth control but also divorce. And some have called for a repeal of the 19th Amendment. I was loath to talk about this for a long time because the last thing the world needs is women getting all judgy and putting down other women for their choices, which they are free to make. But I couldn't help but notice the connection to workplace bullying. First, can I just say how this whole thing is heavily BPD coded? This is BPD on steroids. This is exactly what borderlines do. They study you, work out what you want, and then put on a costume and play a role to be what you want them to be for you, because they have no authentic sense of self. They mimic, just like Lydia on season 5 of Love is Blind. Girl, can we talk about how she's a fucking psycho? I wonder if the trad husbands realize they're being played by a false self, but maybe they don't care. They have sex on demand. I know they say you're not supposed to look a gift horse in the mouth, but some things really are too good to be true. Now, since real wages have not risen, in my country at least, in my lifetime, and I'm really old, for the overwhelming majority of families here and all over the world, this kind of luxury is impossible. They both have to work just to pay rent and put food on the table, so the point is moot. Although Tradwives insist on selling their lifestyle as a choice, for some women, it really isn't. Some women find themselves unexpectedly in this situation, and they are clearly trying to make the most of it and look on the bright side. They can't work, so they create careers for themselves on social media about childcare and housework. They are professional moms. More and more corporate employers are subjecting workers to impossible schedules of long hours and overwork. That's not bullying, that's just capitalism. And the strain on the family gets to the point that something's got to give. And guess who gets to make the sacrifice? Almost always the onus falls on the woman. I've worked with families inside hundreds of homes, and I've seen gender roles reversed only 3 times. And all of those couples were from Europe. All over the world, most workers are coming home to what is called the second shift, the unpaid labor of childcare and housework, and because of an aging population, taking care of elderly parents. People are exhausted. I don't know how they do it. When corporations are willing to pay an employee enough to support a family, he better have a dick, and he better have wifey sitting at home with the kids. The idea of 2 providers both being paid handsomely and equally does not sit well with a lot of people. Now, most of this is in response to economic conditions. Women began entering the workforce, in my country at least, en masse in the 1970s, which really wasn't that long ago if you think about it. And almost 50 years later, although women are more educated than men, they still make less than 84% of what men make for equal work. And the statistics for women of color are disastrous. In my country, the minimum wage has not risen in over a decade and remains a fucking joke. It's unlivable. Pregnancy discrimination is illegal, but commonplace. And in my country, paid parental leave for both mothers and fathers is all but unheard of. And most mothers have to work up until labor and then bounce right back into the workplace within days after delivery if they want to keep their jobs. And affordable daycare for working families is a nightmare. The gender pay gap alone is insulting, and a lot of women are mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore. The solutions are very simple. More than doubling the minimum wage, paid parental leave for both mothers and fathers, and easy widespread access to affordable daycare, not to mention universal health care and free quality public education, both of which create a better society for all of us. These solutions are even more important now that women are being forced to give birth. I wonder if Tradwives recognize the irony of continuing to vote for the very same politicians who consistently refuse to do anything about the conditions that drove them out of the workforce in the first place. The oppression of women has been going on since the agricultural revolution, and for some reason that I don't understand, it appears to fluctuate over time in different cultures. Women gain some ground, and then there's a backlash. The MAGA populists are very clearly showing us the backlash against not only women's rights, but also all of the progressive reforms of both the New Deal and Civil Rights era, because that's exactly what bullies do. I'm completely empty, so I can't create anything. So what I'm going to do is just destroy everything that other people have created. It has gotten to the point that people now enter government only for the express purpose of systematically dismantling it from within. January 6th. The easiest way to control women is to control their bodies. Body shaming, fat shaming, criticizing their weight, controlling their food, objectifying, sexualizing, and of course, stripping them of their reproductive rights. The narcs who do that to women are pretty crass. A more insidious way to demean women is through the division of labor, devaluing all work that is traditionally feminine by underpaying it or not paying for it at all. Housework remains unpaid because women do it. Domestic drudgery eats up literal hours out of everyone's day, but it doesn't count because it doesn't pay anything. So the women who do it can be derided as lazy and not working because they're not making any money. Even in couples in which both partners work, overwhelmingly, it is still the woman who is left to take care of household chores because dudes don't clean. And this is what couples fight about. Again, season 5 of Love is Blind. They're all fighting about the cooking and the cleaning. Everything that women do is devalued until, of course, men do it. When a woman cooks, she's in the kitchen where she belongs. When a man cooks, suddenly he's a 5-star Michelin chef. When a woman sews, she's a seamstress or maybe a tailor. When a man does it, he's a fashion designer. It's always like that. Because women are stereotyped as nurturers and caregivers, it is the service helping professions like nursing and education that are considered traditionally feminine. And it's no coincidence that in my country, at least, there is a shortage of not only nurses, but also educators. That's not economics. That's workplace bullying. The Tradwife movement is part of larger shifts in workplace dynamics that emerged after the pandemic, like the Great Resignation and quiet quitting, in which workers found ways to remove themselves physically or psychologically from the workplace. And economists have struggled to pinpoint an explanation, but we all know the real reason is the toxicity. All kinds of people would gladly take a pay cut if they could just work in a psychologically safe environment. And that has absolutely nothing to do with gender roles and everything to do with narcissism. The Tradwife argument is that women should forego their careers because work makes them masculine, and work is antithetical to femininity. They have found it impossible to maintain a healthy work-life balance, and yes, some of that has to do with the long hours and the overwork. But what have I been saying on this channel for 4 years? Most often the target of workplace bullying is an empath, or at the very least, a highly sensitive person. And it is always the most emotionally literate and expansive person in the workplace who is the first to be targeted. Because narcissism is an antagonistic personality style, it is precisely your heteronormative, stereotypically feminine qualities like emotion, sensitivity, empathy, and intuition that get you targeted. I couldn't agree more that it is difficult, if not impossible, to retain beautiful, positive qualities like grace, elegance, balance, and beauty in the contemporary workplace. And that's not because the workplace is for men. It's because it's toxic. We've all been negatively impacted by our toxic workplaces. We are targeted precisely because we internalize the toxicity, carry it home, and take it out on our loved ones. I have taken out my stress and pain on the people I love the most, immediate family members, friends, and my therapist. A toxic workplace is like an abusive relationship. It brings out the worst in you. It's like we all have to pass through some kind of emotional metal detector on the way to and from work to cleanse ourselves of the toxicity. If a person is loud, angry, aggressive, and likes to pick fights, that's not a man and that's not a masculine woman. That's a toxic person. Girl, I wouldn't marry a woman like that either. I'll do you one further. I would not even be friends with someone like that. We all have to deal with enough bullshit in the workplace and in society at large. No one wants to come home to more of it. If I were a man, I would not want to be associated with things like anger, war, and violence. Anger, aggression, and competitiveness are not masculine qualities. They're narcissistic. Aside from the whole submitting to your husband thing, what Tradwives present sounds like remarkable self-care. Taking care of your health and your appearance, growing your own vegetables, preparing fresh, healthy, hot, home-cooked meals for yourself and your family members as an act of love, not feeding your sensitive children processed junk and fast food, No one wants to live in a dirty home. What a shame that the contemporary workplace has made it impossible for most people to do all of that and work at the same time. Like all of us, Tradwives have something to contribute. The contribution of women to both the public and private sectors has been incomparable. Who has a problem with harmony, gentility, softness, and tenderness? But the contemporary workplace is being denied what these women have to offer because they couldn't find a way to balance traditionally masculine and feminine qualities inside the workplace. As usual on social media, some of these women are just a bunch of grifters with scambition, empty reality show stars with no education, knowledge, or demonstrable skill set who make money out of nothing. And you see it on the left too, New Agers peddling crystals and candles and mindfulness apps. I find it ironic that women admonish other women for working, all while making a killing on social media. It takes a lot of work to make a video. It sounds to me like these women do want to work and they expect to be paid money for the work that they do. They just don't want any coworkers. Who can blame them? Again, that has nothing to do with gender roles and everything to do with workplace bullying. When I first heard about Tradwives, I was shocked, horrified, appalled, and gravely concerned. This one hits personal for me. I was raised by a Tradwife who was suicidal, alcoholic, and miserable. My mother has Sun conjunct Venus and Leo in the 10th house. That's a Fortune 500 CEO. I know work is hard. You have to get up when you'd rather sleep. You have to do things you don't want to do. You have to interact with people you don't want to interact with. But I think most of us can agree we are all happier having someplace to go every day and something to do. If my mother had had work outside the home, I know she would have been much happier. My mother's self-imposed Tradwifery is exactly what fucked up my whole life. If Tradwives love the 1950s so much, I hope they also love Valium, diet pills, lobotomies, and domestic violence. Someone needs to reread The Feminine Mystique, you silly little nincompoop. American women in the 1950s had the highest rates of suicide, depression, and alcoholism in history. How many centuries of hard work on the part of our feminist forebears to secure basic rights and fundamental freedoms, and you're just going to throw it all away? Read about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. How disrespectful can you get? I know I still struggle with my own gender dysphoria, but at this point the conversation about gender roles is just tedious and exhausting. Notice how every time we talk about gender roles, it's always only about women. Men apparently are still doing whatever the fuck they want. When I first started watching Tradwife videos, I was laughing out loud. But when you laugh at people for their views, you only teach them that you're an asshole. In my country, every day, at least 3 women are murdered by someone they know. This stuff isn't funny. This is not so much horrifying or laughable as just sad. Tradwives are basically doing the same thing most of us are doing in response to a toxic world. Retreating, receding, and withdrawing inside this very weird, insular, isolated, microscopic world of self and the immediate family, and inventing this imaginary ideology that is simultaneously delusional and childish. Tradwives have Peter Pan syndrome. Submitting to another person's power, domination, and control is a wonderful way to evade responsibility. If he's the sole authority making all of the decisions, when the shit hits the fan, she doesn't have to take any of the blame. Wasn't my decision. Relationships of inequality with a power imbalance arise out of a feeling of powerlessness on both sides. Trad husbands, obviously, for some reason, feel a loss of power and control in their lives, and they are seeking to compensate for it by controlling another person. Control is not male or masculine. It's abuse. That's exactly what abuse is. I can't control myself, so I'm going to control you instead. No one ever controls anyone. You don't control your partner. You don't control your children. You don't even control your pets. If you have a pet, you're not an owner. You're more like a guardian. The problem is people with control issues are still looking for something to control, and often that's themselves. I'm part of the problem, just sitting up in here meditating with my candles and my crystals, because what else can you do? There's no solidarity or collectivism in the face of narcissistic corporations and the politicians they have in their pocket. It's like climate change. We know that the biggest contributors to climate change are not individuals, but major corporations. So you can recycle toilet paper rolls if you want to, won't make a dent. For example, at the beginning of lockdown during the pandemic, when the number of cars on the road dropped significantly, the amount of emissions didn't. Yes, I do advocate heavily for personal agency and self-care. Often abuse forces you to turn inward and tend to your own wounds. But at the same time, we cannot ignore larger political and economic forces that are victimizing all of us. The cult of hyper-individualism is not going to cut it for very much longer. At some point, we are going to have to do something besides baking sourdough. Early voting in my state starts soon. So get out and vote while you still have the right. I hope that helps. Take care.